Yo, this video here comes highly recommended from people, man. Talking about I need to check this out. The rise and fall of Russian oligarchs. All right, this is from Business Insider. Let's check it out.
This super yacht is worth almost $100 million. It's owned by a sanctioned Russian oligarch. And in April 2022, FBI agents and Spanish officials seized it. For years, the oligarchs didn't have much trouble buying up boats, jets, and mansions in places like this. That's if they didn't end up in prison, exiled, or mysteriously dead. Around 60% of the wealth of the richest Russians is held offshore. But the war in Ukraine has turned the world against members of this opulent uber class.
It's caused a lot of chaos. They've lost access to their accounts. Their family members have had their own accounts frozen or restricted or been kicked out of their banks.
So where did all the money come from, and is there still a chance of the oligarchs holding on to it?
Rise and fall.
The year was 1992, and new business opportunities were emerging from the ashes of the Soviet Union. The president of the new Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin, started privatizing companies that had been under communist state control. It was as if the whole country was up for sale. The government issued millions of these vouchers that Russians could use to buy shares in companies. Each voucher was worth about 2 months' wages at the time.
There were already some people who had amassed small fortunes. They were the ones who were in the best position to take advantage of the new opportunities that were available.
Businessman Roman Abramovich was one of them, and Boris Berezovsky, a car dealership owner, another. More than 15,000 companies were privatized between 1992 and 1994, and as these companies grew, so did the wealth of their owners. And that's how the oligarchs were born. But Russia's rich were about to get much richer. In 1995, the government really needed cash.
Oligarchs managed to edge their way in the door.
They were part of the group that loaned the government hundreds of millions of dollars in exchange for a slice of some of Russia's biggest enterprises. The deal was if the government...
that's what be making me think some of the stuff that be happening to economies be orchestrated for the rich to get richer. You know what I mean? Because we know, and I say we, I'm speaking about them, the rich folks, they know that they can step in and say, hey, you need our money, don't you? Come. Give them money in exchange for what? That's always the kicker there, the exchange. Because you know it's going to come with some type of a price, huge price. Not only are they going to get their money back, plus some, it's going to be coming with those backdoor behind the scene favors.
The government couldn't pay back the loans, the shares would be auctioned off, which is what ended up happening. The oligarchs ended...
Heard that? No. Listen to that again.
Part of the group that loaned the government hundreds of millions of dollars in exchange for a slice of some of Russia's biggest enterprises. The deal was if the government couldn't pay back the loans, the shares would be auctioned off, which is what ended up happening. The oligarchs ended up with vast business empires, some at well below market rate. The bank Menatep, run by Mikhail Khodorkovsky, acquired oil company Yukos. Abramovich, with the help of Berezovsky, took control of another oil company. The newly privatized businesses and their oligarch owners did very well.
They were thought to be somehow keeping the system afloat.
It was reported the oligarchs were behind the funding of Yeltsin's re-election in 1996. They also helped launch the career of his successor, Vladimir Putin. But he would turn out to be no friend of the oligarchs.
The Russian president has warned that the country's super rich are not above the law. The authorities have been getting tough with the oligarchs.
Putin didn't want the oligarchs meddling in his politics. The wealthiest of them...
See how that's crazy? You backdoor them, and then Putin comes in and backdoors you. You know what I mean? Y'all thought y'all were pulling the strings until he got there, and then he cut the strings off and sent it back at you. That's why it's no room in this dirty game, man, to be able to trust people. I'm pretty sure they got together and figured they could trust Putin. He probably came off trustworthy. No haps.
Putin didn't want the oligarchs meddling in his politics. The wealthiest of them all, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, was imprisoned for alleged tax crimes after openly challenging Putin, charges which he has denied.
The message that was sent to other oligarchs was, I'll let you run your businesses and you let me run the country.
Another critic, Berezovsky, fled to the UK, while Abramovich stayed loyal, serving as a governor in northeast Russia. It wasn't long before all this Russian money started cropping up overseas. Berezovsky bought this house in the UK and this one in the south of France. Abramovich went one step further. He bought Chelsea Football Club for around $200 million, along with a vast London mansion and about 70 other properties in the UK. Berezovsky remained a vocal critic of Putin.
Putin's Russia is very dangerous.
I be wondering, how does this stuff go on and not raise red flags? You know what I mean? Automatically, how does this stuff just happen? And then they have the nerve to look at us crazy when we get out of line or do something wrong. It don't even compare. It don't.
Berezovsky remained a vocal critic of Putin.
Putin's Russia is very dangerous for democracy.
He was found dead in his home in England in 2013.
Whoa.
Investigators recorded an open verdict, which means they could not say if he died by suicide or was murdered. Back in Russia, a new class of oligarchs emerged. Remember Khodorkovsky? The reins of his oil empire eventually went to a man known in Moscow as Darth Vader. Igor Sechin is reported to be a former KGB officer, like Putin himself. This new class of oligarchs is known as the Siloviki, or strongmen.
Today's oligarchs are all essentially beholden to Putin because their business depends on the state.
The number of Russians on the Forbes rich list rose from 0 in 1996 to over 100 in 2014. And the oligarchs certainly knew how to splash their cash. This part of London was nicknamed Red Square because so many wealthy Russians moved in, and parts of the French Riviera became known as the Bay of Billionaires. Then there were the floating palaces, soccer teams, and private jets. But their fortunes were about to take a turn. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 triggered sanctions on individuals with close ties to the Kremlin, including Sechin. But these were nothing in comparison to the sanctions storm
Sanctions.
that was to hit the oligarchs in 2022.
What's different about it is just the speed and aggressiveness with which these sanctions have been imposed.
The brutal invasion of Ukraine launched by Putin in February caused an international outcry. Sanctions came thick and fast, aimed at restricting the wealth and movement of those with links to the Kremlin.
We're coming for you, ill-begotten gains.
In a matter of weeks, the US sanctioned more than 400 people and entities.
Our clients are all scrambling to understand what these new restrictions on them are, what they have to do to comply.
Lawyers like Eric Ferrari advise people and companies that have been sanctioned.
The US government has determined there is a threat, in this case, Russia's harmful foreign activities, which allows them to designate parties who are engaged in certain types of conduct.
The sanctions hit not just government officials, but also executives of state-owned enterprises.
The US Treasury only needs a reasonable cause to believe that they meet the designation criteria.
The two biggest factors are kind of proximity to Putin and doing Putin's bidding, set up against what's the impact going to be and can be mitigated properly.
The UK and the EU have their own sanctions lists, as do a handful of other countries.
Oligarchs in London will have nowhere to hide.
All of these measures will significantly harm Putin's ability to finance his war.
Man, you attack somebody's business, but when you go to attacking their money like that, Putin, man, hey, man, a person like that, when you do that and you make those bold and brash decisions to go after Ukraine and do all this to where it not only affects you, it affects the people, it affects other things, businesses, people's money, their pockets and stuff like that. You got to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Who can you trust close to you? You sure you can trust those officials that you have close to you? That's no way to be right there, man. That's why just hearing that.
Harm Putin's ability to finance his war.
As the net tightened, the race was on for oligarchs to find safe havens for their money, boats, and planes. Abramovich could see the storm coming. He reportedly shifted an investment company to a close associate as Russia was invading Ukraine. About 2 weeks later, he was added to the UK's sanctions list for having a stake in a company accused of producing steel for Russian tanks, which the company denies. His UK assets were also frozen.
The majority of the wealth of these people is in publicly traded companies. There might be complicated corporate structures around them, but blocking up those holdings and impacting those companies has an effect, and that's just hard to dodge.
Some of Abramovich's business interests have been harder to track down. Take Matterhorn Capital, which has been linked to Abramovich. It was first registered in the...
See, it's different when we're talking about arresting a drug dealer and this, that, and the third. When you get up into these oligarchs and these politicians and different ones like that, and you start to follow the money and what it's all attached to, bro, that paper trail, that money trail, man, you'd be surprised at some of the companies they're attached to and holdings and different things like that in that stock market. You'll be surprised, man. You'll start to look at a lot of these companies different too. You know what I mean? Because they be knowing who's giving them that money. Don't let them fool you and say they don't know where it's coming from.
Matterhorn Capital, which has been linked to Abramovich. It was first registered in the Cayman Islands before being moved to the British Virgin Islands. Both are British overseas territories known for helping wealthy people hide their money. And then moved to the island of Jersey. But in April 2022, Jersey froze assets worth more than $7 billion connected to Abramovich. That's around half of his estimated wealth. He won't even be able to profit from the sale of his beloved Chelsea Football Club. Meanwhile, Abramovich has done all he can to distance himself from the Kremlin, even playing a role as mediator in peace talks between Ukraine and Russia.
I bet.
But after one of these meetings, he and other negotiators reportedly suffered symptoms of poisoning. The US has so far spared Abramovich from its sanctions list, but the EU hasn't. About a dozen properties in France linked to Abramovich were seized. In fact, the EU and UK have banned him from entering. He was spotted at Tel Aviv airport a few days after being sanctioned. A jet linked to him then flew to Istanbul and on to Moscow. 2 of his yachts were scrambled to Turkey, beyond the reach of Western sanctions. Maritime trackers show yachts belonging to wealthy Russians also fleeing to places like Montenegro and the Maldives. But Sechin wasn't quick enough. French authorities seized the superyacht Amore Vero near Marseille in March 2022 as its crew was preparing to set sail. The French say it belongs to Sechin, which he denies. Another boat that's also linked to Sechin was detained by Spanish authorities.
He fundamentally will have trouble conducting any sort of cross-border transaction, period. He's probably confined mostly to living in Russia.
Vast boats and homes can be hard to hide, but much of the oligarchs' real wealth is carefully hidden away. Many of their assets and businesses are registered under a different name, as trusts or shell companies based in offshore tax havens.
This is oftentimes a game of whack-a-mole. That's a lot of what sanctions is.
In the US, banks are required to name the beneficial owner of an account, while private equity firms and hedge funds are not. But it's been getting harder for the oligarchs to conceal their wealth. Since 2016, the UK has required that the beneficial owners of companies be named. The Cayman Islands said it froze $7.3 billion in assets belonging to sanctioned Russians. Once they are blacklisted, the reputational damage can last a lifetime, and no amount of money can buy that back.
I have clients who are off of the sanctions list, who've been removed years ago, who still can't get a bank account in UAE, or whose family members still can't get a bank account although they were never sanctioned.
Sanctioned oligarch Mikhail Friedman feels he has been unfairly targeted.
We do not have any impact for political decision.
According to Forbes, his wealth...
You should have known they was going to start trying to push Putin out there and trying to hold their hands up saying, listen. But it goes back to the beginning. Y'all are responsible for him being in office. Y'all are ultimately, if you think about it, ultimately responsible. So how can you back out now? Even though it wasn't y'all's decisions that made him do what he did, still there's somewhat of a connection there though, bro.
Wealth has shrunk by more than $3.5 billion. By April 2022, 18 oligarchs had dropped off the Forbes billionaires list because of the avalanche of sanctions. Sanctions may be hurting the oligarchs, but they are not the real target. That would be Vladimir Putin and his war machine. And so far, Putin appears unfazed as he doubles down on his invasion of Ukraine.
Over the past several years, the Russian government and the Russian president had kind of insulated themselves from the influence of elite business persons in that country.
In the end, the biggest threat of all to the oligarchs may not be the West.
These are people who are so dependent on Putin that what they're worried about most is that Putin's own power over them will actually increase as a result of sanctions, because they have nowhere to go. They have to rely on Putin's goodwill.
Megaliths of Gornaya Shoria. What are the real backgrounds of the colossal Gornaya Shoria megaliths? Located in southern Siberia, east of the Altai Mountains, the gigantic rocks divide the public into two camps: those who suspect that we are dealing with a natural formation, and those who believe this is a relic of a lost civilization. Should the theory of the artificial background be confirmed one day, the megaliths with a weight of up to 4,000 tons would advance to the largest and heaviest of their kind. This title is currently still held by the megaliths of Baalbek in Lebanon, the most massive of which weighs in at 1,650 tons.
Wow.
But how can these imposing stone giants have been formed in southern Siberia? After all, at first glance, it really does look as if the massive consisted of countless individual parts that were only subsequently piled up to form a coherent structure. Well, officially, it is said that the megaliths were formed by a combination of geological processes and the intensive weathering of the rock. According to this, the striking rectangular shape of the individual components is due, on one hand, to the tectonic forces acting on the bedrock, and on the other hand, to the pressure reduction that occurs as a result of erosion in the parts near the surface. Astonishing find. The opposing side, which doubts this background of formation, does not only point to the precise arrangement and the striking shapes of the blocks weighing several tons, but also to a discovery which hardly gets any attention in the public reporting. This discovery could not only give us a clue to the true background of the formation, but also to the almost unbelievable secret which slumbers under it. So a research team came across a mysterious entrance in one of the stone megaliths. After rappelling down the shaft, the men found themselves in a complex cave system that left them open-mouthed. But it wasn't just the sheer size of the subterranean structure that took the explorers' breath away, but once again the striking geometric shape that cast mysterious doubt on a natural origin. According to this, some of the blocks that together form the cave system are up to 15 meters long and weigh thousands of tons. Quite a few people believe that the traced shaft is only the tip of a much larger archaeological iceberg. According to this, the cave could in fact represent something like the entrance to a full-fledged city under the earth, built in ancient times by a culture that was eventually completely forgotten. Darinkyu. Even though the true background of the tunnel system remains hidden places like Darinkyu show us that people in the past did indeed build massive cities underground.
Seeing that picture right there, do y'all think that's actually how it was? Or is this just, you know what I mean, them just going overboard with it, embellishing a little bit more than actually was? But I don't know about the levels, but I do believe that there still remains some underground cities that we just don't know about, or we know about and we just don't expose them to the public. You know what I mean? I feel as though some underground cities Definitely. Possibly here too in the US. Absolutely. Absolutely. If the government has facilities in mountains and stuff like that, it's definitely some underground cities where people are currently living at. I wholeheartedly believe that.
Show us that people in the past did indeed build massive cities underground. Discovered by chance in the early 1960s, the story of Darinkiyu's origins remains hotly disputed to this day. Some experts believe that it was the Hittites who created the secret tunnel system more than 4,000 years ago. It is commonly believed that such facilities were used by persecuted groups as secluded places of refuge. As a result, underground cities like Darinkiyu were usually locked with special locking stones that could hardly be opened from the outside. So far, 8 floors of the complex should be uncovered, which serve the most diverse purposes. Thus, in addition to ordinary sleeping and living quarters, we can find a monastery, storage and meeting facilities, and an ancient prison. How many inhabitants Darinkiyu had during its history is unknown. Some researchers assume that up to 3,000 people could have lived here at the same time. Others even consider a number of 50,000 conceivable. Basically, it can be concluded that the underground cities of Cappadocia, of which 36 have been traced so far, were directly connected to each other via branched tunnel passages. The Egyptians in the Grand Canyon.
And think about that too, man. You think about, for those who were like, I just don't think so. Think about the tunneling system that goes on, where people be trying to smuggle things in. So you think we just got tunneling systems and no underground cities going on? Come on, man. Crawl from up under that rock you've been living up under.
As one of the great natural wonders of the earth, the Grand Canyon is known far beyond the borders of its U.S. homeland. Every year, more than 6 million people flock to Arizona to marvel at the roughly 450-kilometer-long canyon with their own eyes. Wondering what the Grand Canyon has lost in today's post? Well, that becomes clear to us when we take a look at the official website of the Smithsonian Magazine. According to it, the Smithsonian Institute has long been suspected of meticulously keeping its most important discoveries under lock and key. Discoveries that would shake the foundations of the common view of history. In one of its sections, the website takes up the quote, untrue stories that have always been circulated around the U.S. research and educational institution. There, we also learn about a myth that says the Smithsonian employees came across the traces of the ancient Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. In detail, this story refers to a headline printed by the Arizona Gazette on April 5, 1909. Remarkable find points to ancient people who migrated from the Orient. Further, there was talk of an immeasurably rich cave discovered in the Grand Canyon, bringing historical truth to light. The short statement on the part of those responsible is simply, this is not true. A persistent myth. In this regard, Smithsonian Magazine points out that the Arizona Gazette was the only newspaper at the time that carried such a report. Moreover, there would be no record of the 2 researchers named Kincaid and Jordan mentioned in the article. So far, so clear. Or is it? Indeed, there were some people who were not quite so easily fobbed off. But why is that? Let's get to the bottom of the story once again. The first article, printed as early as March 1909, deals with the explorer G.E. Kincaid and his work on the Colorado River. It also touches on some interesting archaeological discoveries, but without giving any further details. The matter is somewhat different in the following report of April 5th. Here the reader learns about the discovery of an ancient hidden city in a cave system in the Grand Canyon. According to Kincaid, however, this site was clearly different from those of Native Americans and possessed an, quote, ancient Egyptian touch. The man-made compound of chambers and passageways is said to have housed a number of mummies, a religious shrine, copper artifacts, and hieroglyphs. Based on the astounding size of the underground city, Kincaid estimated that it could have held up to 50,000 people. The problem, according to our knowledge city, the ancient Egyptians never set foot in America. So the question is, how should we classify the articles from that time? Did the Arizona Gazette perhaps allow itself some sort of belated April Fool's joke? What is certain is that John Wesley Powell tracked down a series of caves in the Grand Canyon, and there he also came across the relics of earlier civilizations. We now know of more than 400 Native American sites in the region, some of whose roots go back 12,000 years. So could it be that Kincaid was mistaken in his assessment of his cave find? On the one hand, it seems unlikely that the Smithsonian Institute would conceal a find of such great significance. But on the other hand, critics believe that it is precisely that revolutionary significance that leads to this and similar discoveries being categorically kept secret. For those who are thinking of traveling to the Grand Canyon themselves to get to the bottom of the matter, however, there is bad news. The area where the hidden city is said to be located may not be entered by civilians. Here's what Kincaid himself had to say about the location. About 42 miles upstream from El Tovar Crystal Canyon, I saw patches in a sedimentary formation on the east wall, about 2,000 feet above the riverbed. There was no trail to it, but I eventually reached it. Above a ledge that hid the cave from the river was the entrance. Finally, let's take a quick look at what the indigenous people have to say about the cave systems in the region. If we follow an old Hopi Indian legend, their ancestors once lived underground in the Grand Canyon. This changed only when the people with one heart began to fight the people with two hearts. In the process, the chief of one tribe grew a tree that pierced the roof of the cave. As a result, the One Heart people sent a messenger to the Sun Temple, but he never returned. One day, however, he shall return and bring back the Hopi their ancestral land. So people, now we are curious about your opinion. Do you think the megaliths of Gornaya Shoria were really formed naturally? And could there really be an underground city underneath? And what do you think about the ancient Egyptian artifacts allegedly found in the Grand Canyon? As always, drop us your thoughts.
Like always, stuff is hidden from us, won't be talked about. You know what I mean? Do I believe there are underground cities? Absolutely. Especially in the past. I would be more so leery about ones today, but I'm still of the belief that they do exist. You know what I mean? And as far as those buildings back there, we're still trying to figure out whether or not that was naturally done by Mother Nature or man-made. And if so, what technology did they have? That's still our goal to figure that out. But y'all get at me in the comment section, man. Let me know what you think. Till next one, I'm gone, man.